속을 펴야 되죠. Put it in between, sandwich it in between, what do we call this seoksoe thing in English? I don't know. Take a little bit of the yangnyeom and then just brush it over the top, just like that. Put the marinated side straight over the top of the charcoal, as hot as it can get, and just get it nice and sizzling so it's caramelizing. When you're cooking the hwangtae and todok over the charcoal, and it lets out this beautiful aroma, it's just savory, smoky, you got the sweetness and then the aromatics of the wild chives. It's intoxicating. Absolutely beautiful. Pop one of each in your mouth. You got this bududuk, bududuk, jongduk, jongduk of the dodok, and you got this kind of 꼬들꼬들한 식감. Now, you're not just gonna sit there and eat this, right? What do we need? We need something to drink on, something to sip on. The perfect thing here is gonna be a makgeolli. Yeah, we got those tropical notes, some bright acidity that's going to cut through some of the stronger flavors in the hwangtae and the todok, harmonize on their intense level, and just kind of ride it out.
Global heritage will unite. We share brilliant values and honor the world's most cherished legacies to pass our heritage on to future generations. Busan invites you, the 48th session of UNESCO World Heritage Committee, July 2026, Busan, Korea.
In our headlines on this Wednesday, February 11th, here in South Korea. South Korea's ministers of culture, education and justice take questions from members of the parliament with regard to their policies for the nation in the final day of interpellation today. And findings for the month of January show South Korea's workforce expands by its smallest size in 13 months, with a rise of 108,000 jobs on year, and the weather is said to have played a part in the weak number. Also, on the local front, the Lee Jae-myung administration launches a ministerial-level task force to put into place special management measures aimed at easing the high cost of living. We started the National Assembly today, where members of the Lee Jae-myung administration in charge of social affairs are taking questions in the final day of the three-day interpellation. For details on this, I have my colleague An Sung-jin live on the line. Sung-jin, it's good to have you back. So what has been happening there today?
Right. Good afternoon, Sunny. Today we'll wrap up the last day of the government questioning sessions that took place over the past 3 days, including today. On Monday, we saw a focus on politics, diplomacy, unification, and national security. This was followed by a session on the economy on Tuesday, and today it centers on culture, society, and education. The session is well underway at the moment, with Prime Minister Kim Min-seok and government officials, including the Education Minister, Justice Minister, and Culture Minister present. The ruling Democratic Party is using the last round of government questioning to underscore the need for regional administration integration, which is currently being pushed under the Lee Jae-myung administration. The Prime Minister stated that unless the relevant legislation passes the National Assembly by the end of February, the merger of metropolitan governments would be virtually impossible to be completed before the June 3rd local elections, and asked for the cooperation of the opposition party. Meanwhile, the main opposition People Power Party is pressing the government over rising house prices and a weak Korean won. Lawmakers from the PPP also questioned the current administration's real estate policy, asking whether reconstruction or redevelopment have become taboo words as it criticizes the current housing supply measures. Following the end of government questioning sessions, a plenary session is scheduled for Thursday to handle livelihood-related bills, with a fierce debate expected if judicial reform bills appear on the agenda. But that's all I have for now on the latest updates from the National Assembly. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Songjin, thank you for the latest at the Parliament, and do keep us posted. Moving forward then, President Lee Jae-myung and NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte spoke on the phone this past Tuesday for a second conversation on strengthening security cooperation. According to Blue House spokesperson Kim Nam-jun, they agreed to maintain close communication with regard to events on the Korean Peninsula and the war in Ukraine. President also urged for tangible partnership under the Korea-NATO Defense Industry Consultative Group created last year, and Rutte in response voiced his support. Top diplomatic and trade officials representing South Korea and the Netherlands sat down here in Seoul for their first dialogue under this format aimed at reinforcing their strategic partnership. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young covers the inaugural talks.
Two major semiconductor powers, South Korea and the Netherlands, are deepening cooperation across key pillars of economic security. On Wednesday, the two sides held their first ever 2+2 high-level dialogue in Seoul, bringing together foreign and industry officials for a joint strategic consultation. Foreign Minister Cho Hyun and Trade Minister Yeo An-go met their Dutch counterparts, Minister David van Weel and Minister Auke de Vries.
Our two countries have evolved into truly complementary and irreplaceable partners, especially in semiconductors and advanced technologies.
The launch of the 2+2 channel indicates that Seoul and The Hague now see each other as core partners on strategic interests. The format was agreed upon 2 years ago as the country's two leaders committed to building a semiconductor alliance. Both countries are key players in the global semiconductor supply chain. South Korea's Samsung and SK Hynix produce over half of the world's DRAM and NAND flash memory chip supplies. The Netherlands plays a strategic role upstream. It is home to ASML, the world's monopoly in extreme ultraviolet lithography technology, essential for cutting-edge chip production. For both governments, the agenda reflects a shared push to secure stable supply chains for strategic industries, from semiconductor equipment and materials to critical raw materials required for advanced manufacturing. In their joint statement, the ministers pledged to strengthen semiconductor cooperation by linking ecosystems across small and medium enterprises and research institutions, as well as exploring joint R&D in areas such as quantum technology. Amid rising geo-economic tensions and supply chain disruption, they also agreed to expand coordination on early warning systems, export control consultations, and supply chain monitoring. The ministers further discussed the safe and responsible use of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity. Seoul and The Hague reaffirmed the need to reinforce their strategic partnership, deeming it an invaluable instrument for guaranteeing sustainable growth capacity, economic security, and technological leadership within a rules-based order.
Over the past years, we've faced unprecedented global challenges and geopolitical shifts that are marked increasingly by superpowers playing power politics. Now, more than ever, for us, it's necessary to work together with our partners to protect our shared interests and our shared values.
The next 2+2 dialogue will take place in 2 years' time in The Hague. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Across the border, North Korea has condemned Japan for seeking military partnerships. Our Park Gon-woo explains.
North Korea on Wednesday warned Japan against forming military alliances with other countries. The warning came through its state newspaper Rodong-sinmun after Japan announced that its ambassador to Canada and Canada's defense minister signed an agreement last month on the transfer of defense equipment and technology. The paper claimed that signing military agreements, sharing equipment and intelligence, and conducting joint exercises are only possible within a military alliance. It describes such moves as a red line, arguing that Japan should not expand military cooperation. Meanwhile, there weren't any comments on Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi in the ruling Liberal Democratic Party's recent landslide election win, a result which is expected to accelerate efforts to revise the constitution and clarify the status of the self-defense forces. Japanese media outlet Kyodo News reported on Wednesday that Japan is considering joining the US-led priority Ukraine requirements list to support Ukraine. If it participates, Japan would become another non-NATO country to do so, following Australia and New Zealand. However, due to domestic restrictions, its contribution would likely be limited to non-lethal equipment, such as vehicles and radar systems. Park Gonu, Arirang News.
In other news, Unification Minister Chung Dong-young has voiced regret over recent drone incursions into North Korea by South Korean civilians. Now, this is the first such formal statement by a senior government official and came during an address at Myeongdong Cathedral here in Seoul back on Tuesday. He also asserted that in October 2024, under the former Yoon Suk-yeol administration, the military sent drones to North Korea 11 times to provoke a response. He called the actions reckless and dangerous, claiming that they nearly led to war. Employment in the month of January expanded by its smallest size in over a year, and the weather has been cited as one factor behind the faltering numbers. Our Kim Do-yeon has the latest.
The latest employment data shows South Korea's job market is cooling rapidly. According to the Ministry of Data and Statistics on Wednesday, the number of employed people stood at 27.98 million in January, an increase of 108,000 on year. This is a significant slowdown compared to previous months, marking the smallest growth since December 2024.
By sector, the health and social welfare and transportation industries saw job gains. In contrast, the agriculture and public administration sectors shed jobs.
Freezing temperatures reduced activity in the agriculture, forestry, and fishing sectors, which saw jobs plummet by 107,000. This directly impacted older workers, while jobs for those aged 60 and above did increase by 141,000. It was the smallest rise for that age group in 5 years.
As for the rise in unemployment among those aged 60 and older, officials attribute this to a mix of seasonal factors, specifically the cold snap, and delays in the start of government-subsidized senior job programs, which left many older people waiting for work.
But weather isn't the only factor. Core industries remain weak. Manufacturing jobs fell by 23,000 and the construction sector shed another 20,000 jobs, continuing a long streak of decline. Young people are also finding it harder to enter the workforce. The number of workers aged 15 to 29 dropped by 175,000, and the number of people simply resting without seeking work rose by 110,000. This aligns with separate data showing a hiring freeze at major conglomerates. A report by CEO Score reveals that Korea's top 500 companies actually cut their total workforce by over 6,700 last year. More than half of these major firms reduced their headcount. The polarization is distinct. While CJ Olive Young and SK Hynix added thousands of jobs riding the K-beauty and semiconductor boom, traditional giants struggled. LG Electronics and retail leaders including E-Mart and Lotte Shopping cut thousands of positions, and even Samsung Electronics saw its workforce shrink by over 1,000. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the government has set up a special task force assigned to addressing the bread and butter issues of everyday Koreans. Our Ian Jin has details.
The South Korean government has launched a ministerial-level task force to implement special management measures aimed at improving the cost of living. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Economy Gu Yoon-chol presided over the first meeting of the Ministerial Task Force for Special Management of Consumer Prices at the government complex in Seoul on Wednesday morning. In his opening remarks, Koo said that while consumer prices met the government's target of 2% in January, the cumulative impact of price increases over recent years has left the public still feeling a high cost of living burden. He particularly noted the high cost of food and said the task force would conduct intensive inspections of essential goods closely related to daily life. During the inaugural meeting, Koo highlighted a more pressing issue of some business operators betraying market trust by engaging in unfair collusion or exploiting systems for gain. He added that the government will intensively inspect essential items to eradicate unfair trade practices and move swiftly to correct any distorted distribution structures. Chaired by the Minister of Finance and Economy and vice-chaired by the head of the Fair Trade Commission, the task force will consist of 3 teams to inspect unfair trade practices, monitor fraudulent receipt of support, and review distribution structures. The Finance Ministry said the task force will be operated intensively during the first half of this year. Ieun-jin, Arirang News.
And on the international front, neighboring Japan is the latest country on the receiving end of U.S. President Donald Trump's fury. He is reportedly outraged over the pace of Tokyo's pledged investments into the U.S. Our Lee Seung-jae reports.
U.S. President Donald Trump is reportedly voicing strong dissatisfaction over delays in Japanese investments pledged under last year's trade and tariff agreement. According to a report by Japan's Nikkei newspaper on Tuesday, President Trump has high expectations for Japan's newly elected Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, but is also frustrated that promised investments into the United States have not moved forward as quickly as expected. The report says Washington privately communicated to Tokyo that the president is furious over issues with Japan, even before he publicly expressed support for Takaichi on social media. At the center of the dispute is a pledge by Japan to invest $550 billion in the United States as part of last year's tariff deal. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick reportedly told President Trump that the first round of investment plans would be finalized by the end of 2025. However, the Nikkei reported that the sheer scale of the projects has slowed planning and coordination. The initial target to reach a concrete agreement was the end of January this year, but that deadline was pushed back to the end of this month. President Trump is said to view the delay with suspicion, reportedly claiming that Japan may be intentionally slowing negotiations. Despite the report, Prime Minister Takaichi has reaffirmed that the U.S.-Japan alliance remains strong and unchanged.
Regarding my upcoming meeting with President Trump, we will reaffirm the unshakable unity between Japan and the United States and further advance Japan-U.S. cooperation across a wide range of fields, including diplomacy, the economy, and security.
Tokyo appears to be moving to ease tensions with Japan's economy, trade, and industry minister, Ryosei Akazawa, who oversees tariff negotiations, set to visit the United States this week. Kyodo News reports that Akazawa is expected to meet Commerce Secretary Lutnick during the trip, with talks likely to focus on investment timelines and ways to keep the bilateral trade relationship on track. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
Back here in South Korea, we cover efforts to promote digital literacy among senior members of the Korean society as AI advances comfort and convenience for their younger counterparts. Our Cha Yoon-kyung reports.
The classroom is full with no empty seats to be found, and people are paying close attention to the lecture. The assignment for the day is for the older adult students to install a movie theater application on their smartphones. Although they've carefully followed along while taking notes, many encountered difficulties right from the very first step.
This is the search bar. Try typing something. Press Enter, tap search, and then the magnifying glass icon. When you tap it, it starts searching.
Though questions lead to more questions, and there's so much they don't know, their passion is strong.
I learn one thing and forget another. I can't even remember it properly. So I came here hoping to learn something.
In an era where smart and digital technologies take over everyday life in place of face-to-face human interaction, it's not so easy for the older members of society. For older adults, the most important thing in learning digital technology is repetition. This is why they continue to go to places where they not only attend classes, but also learn to become more familiar with digital devices in everyday life.
Since their daily lives are largely disconnected from digital technology, we aim to give them confidence by showing that digital devices aren't difficult as they get hands-on experience.
Seoul plans to expand the centers to 6 locations by the end of this year, providing spaces where older adults can learn and relax while engaging with digital technology. Cha Yoon-kyung, Arirang News.
Hello and welcome. I am your AI sports correspondent, Arirang. This section features AI-generated content and scripts, bringing you the latest news from the Olympic Winter Games Milano Cortina 2026. Here are our top stories. South Korean figure skater Taejun Hwan advanced to the free skate competition after placing 6th in the men's singles short program on Tuesday at the Milano Ice Skating Arena. Ta earned 92.72 points in the short program after landing a quadruple salchow in a triple axel, marking his highest score of the season. This result qualifies him for the free skate, which will determine the overall medalists. Ilya Malinin of the United States leads the field with 108.16 points, followed by Japan's Yuma Kageyama. The combined scores from this short program in the upcoming free skate on Friday will decide the final Olympic standings. South Korea's short track mixed relay team failed to reach the medal final on Tuesday, following a collision in the semifinals. Kim Ki-lee fell after tangling with Kanin Sto-dud of the United States. Officials rejected a South Korean request for advancement, citing the team's third-place position at the time of the foul. South Korea subsequently placed second in the B final behind the Netherlands to finish 6th overall. Host nation Italy won the gold medal, with Canada and Belgium taking silver and bronze. Following a day of recovery and training on Wednesday, Korea's short track squad will return to the ice on Thursday for the women's 500-meter and the men's 1,000-meter. The International Olympic Committee on Tuesday banned Ukrainian skeleton racer Vladislav Heraskevich from wearing a helmet featuring images of athletes killed in the war with Russia. The IOC ruled that the tribute violates Rule 50 of the Olympic Charter, which bans political demonstrations. Although the committee offered a black armband as a compromise, Heraskevich stated he will wear the helmet during Thursday's competition in Cortina. Arianna Fontana, Italy's most decorated Winter Olympian, added to her medals on Tuesday by leading the host nation to gold in the short track mixed relay. This victory marks Fontana's 12th career medal across 6 Winter Games. Italy finished the 2,000-meter race at the Milano Ice Skating Arena in 2 minutes 39.019 seconds, coming ahead of Canada and Belgium. The win moves Fontana within 1 medal of the all-time Italian Olympic record held by fencer Edoardo Mangiaruti. She returns to the ice this Thursday for the women's 500-meter quarterfinals. Before we head out, let's look ahead. Appearing now on your screen are the current medal standings and the upcoming schedule for the Olympic Winter Games Milano Cortina 2026.
Due to stagnant air conditions, the skies over downtown Seoul have turned completely dusty today. Therefore, visibility became poor, making it feel quite stuffy out there. Fine dust from overseas is expected to flow in, pushing ultrafine dust levels to bad across most parts of the country. Please wear a fine dust mask and take extra care of your respiratory health. In the meantime, dry weather warnings and advisories have been in place for over a month, especially in the eastern parts of the country. It is very important to be extra careful to prevent wildfires. Seoul and Gwangju will start off a bit colder than today at -2 degrees, with Daegu and Gyeongju -3 degrees. Highs will rise to 9 degrees in Seoul, 13 degrees in Busan. Toward the end of this week, daytime temperatures in Seoul are expected to rise into the double digits. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world. Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, so do stay with us.
Right now, the new shopping game is starting.
National Assembly has voted to set up a special committee to accelerate legislation aimed at paving the path to South Korea's $350 billion investment into the U.S. Hello, welcome to Press Perspective for this Wednesday, February 11th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. Today we touch upon the efforts by the Parliament here to push forward legislation related to South Korea's investment pledge under its trade deal with the Trump administration. For more on this, our freelance journalist Yang Chen-hao here in the studio. Chen-hao, welcome back.
Hello, long time no see.
I also have Professor Shim Myung-gyu at Yonsei University joining our talk virtually. Professor Shim, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, Chen-hao, let's start here in the studio. Let's start off then with news of the National Assembly forming a committee to fast-track legislation related to investments in the U.S.
So during the APEC meeting in Gyeongju last year, South Korea and the United States reached the agreement under which Seoul would make $250 billion in direct investment in the United States, with an additional $100 billion earmarked to support the American shipbuilding industry. And in return, Washington agreed to lower the reciprocal tariffs on South Korea, including auto-related tariffs from 25% to 15%. However, last month, in the end of last month, President Trump suddenly issued the statement saying that South Korean National Assembly had failed to fulfill the agreement as the related legislation had not been passed yet. So he then reversed the course, raising the tariffs back to 25%, a move that caught both South Korea government and the public opinion off guard. In fact, last November, the Democratic Party, the ruling party, had already submitted a draft bill titled the Special Act on an investment in the United States, but the ruling People Power Party expressed strong reservations, concerns, arguing that investing $350 million in exchange for tariff reductions was too high a price to pay. So the People Power Party also insisted that the memorandum of cooperation signed between South Korea and the United States on November 14 should be treated as a treaty first, and then therefore must first receive the National Assembly's approval before discussions on the special investment bill can proceed. And then the Democratic Party, however, countered that President Trump raised the tariff through executive orders without approval from the United States Congress. They argued that requiring South Korea to go through parliamentary ratification would impose greater constraints on Seoul. And they also claimed that since the Democratic Party has already proposed the special act, passage by the National Assembly could carry equivalent legal effect. So South Korea's presidential office shared the same view, stating that the agreement is a memorandum of cooperation, not a treaty, and therefore does not require a parliamentary approval. And so the two major parties remain divided over how to handle the outcome of the trade negotiations with the United States. But the fact remains that President Trump has raised the tariffs, a move that could have a serious impact on South Koreans' industry. So over the past 2 weeks, we can see that the Seoul administration has repeatedly sent officials to Washington to deal with it for talks, but without any concrete results till now. So the National Assembly voted Monday to establish a special committee. The committee will consist of 16 lawmakers, 8 from the Democratic Party and another 7 from the People Power Party and 1 from the minor small party, and will be chaired by People Power Party lawmaker. The committee will operate for 30 days with the goal of fast-tracking the bill in an effort to block further tariff hikes.
Right. And China, very briefly speaking, could you tell us what efforts are also underway to ensure that South Korea's investments into the U.S. lead to bilateral benefits while reducing risks?
Yeah, in fact, the tariff agreement reached between South Korea and the United States at Gyeongju initially sparked optimism. Many people are so glad, but indeed some local journalists remain skeptical, arguing that investing $350 billion in exchange for tariff reductions is fundamentally unfair. The size of the investment is raising concerns as questions remain over how such a massive sum, such a large number of money would be allocated and managed. And according to what we have learned, the South Korean government is moving ahead with a thorough review of proposed United States-bound investment projects before the related legislation is finalized in the National Assembly. Before receiving final approval, each investment plan will be evaluated based on profitability, strategic value, and the current foreign exchange environment to ensure that the money is really spent where it matters most. And such cautious approach reflects its concerns over a high level of uncertainty surrounding President Trump. As a result, South Korea government is seeking to retain stronger oversight and control over any large-scale investment in the United States.
Right. Professor Shim, speaking as a scholar, what are your thoughts with regard to South Korea's pledged investment of $350 billion in the US, of course? I mean, what are the gains to be garnered and perhaps what are the dangers, if you will, to be dealt with?
Yeah, let me first point out the bright side. It might play the role of keeping lower tariff rate that the exporting firms face, which improves their competitiveness in terms of prices in the U.S. market. The recent news that Japan also has a similar issue with the U.S. Because of the delayed implementation of investment in the U.S. reminds us the importance of such a deal. And this potentially increases GDP growth rate of the Korean economy, which heavily depends on the export. If the return is really materialized as is planned, it might not put a lot of pressure on the Korean economy as well as the Korean government. So it is not that a big deal if all the bright side really come true. However, it clearly has a clear con. There would be less domestic investment because investment in the U.S. substitute out domestic investment, which we have already experienced for a decade. And then there will be less employment in Korea. And I also want to point out that exporting firms tend to create high quality jobs because they are usually associated with high labor productivity. And if we lose such jobs, then there would be less income in Korea, and there will be less consumption, which counteracts the positive effects of the investment there in the U.S. So in the medium or maybe in the long run, this would lower domestic demand, potentially hurting the growth of the Korean economy, unless we can make another plan to create more jobs and domestic investment. Such an investment might hurt the Korean economy at the cost of lower tariffs.
Right, so which is definitely something to think about. Chen Hao, in the meantime, there are quite a number of people who believe that Mr. Trump's abrupt announcement of higher U.S. tariffs on South Korea may have been in response to an exclusive interview of Finance Minister Koo Yoon-chul by Reuters earlier last month. Could you tell us a bit about that interview?
Yes, so this interview was conducted by the Reuters news agency on January 16th. It was like nearly 3 weeks ago. So when asked whether South Korea's investment in the United States could begin in the first half of this year, Minister Koo Yoon-chul responded that it was unlikely. He explained that even if a nuclear power plant gets selected, for example, there will be processes to follow, such as finding a location, designing it, and building it. So the initial outflows could be much smaller than that. Not a lot of investment can be made under the current forex situation, at least for this year. Another key issue drawing the attention is the continued depreciation of the Korean won. Recently, the exchange rate has recently hovered between 1,400 and 1,500 won per US dollar, levels close to those seen during South Korea's IMF financial crisis in 1997. With the won under pressure, the large-scale capital outflows, particularly United States dollars, could further weaken the Korean currency. And the Reuters also mentioned that the United States Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent discussed the recent depreciation of the won with Minister Koo, and that he himself also believes that the current exchange rate does not reflect South Korea's economic fundamentals. Stabilizing the foreign exchange market has therefore become a very important priority for the South Korean government. If the won were to recover, I think the Seoul government will likely be in a stronger position to pursue United States investments more decisively. As for whether the Reuters interview itself may have influenced President Trump's decision to raise tariffs, at least for me, it is still difficult to draw a direct conclusion. However, President Trump is widely seen as an impatient and eager to achieve results quickly. In reality, South Korea and the United States only reached their agreement in October and November, just 3 months ago. It is unrealistic to expect a country to immediately pass related legislation following the conclusion of a bilateral trade deal. From this perspective, President Trump's actions run counter to common practice and risk provoking negative reactions toward him and the United States.
And for now, Professor Shim, the Lee Jae-myung administration, it has clearly conveyed its commitment to the terms of its trade deal with the U.S. And as we mentioned earlier, the Parliament has set up a special committee to fast-track legislation related to investment in the U.S. by South Korean companies. Now, despite these tensions between Seoul and Washington, the South Korean stock market has been rallying ahead. How do you explain the strength of the local market, and what are your prospects going forward?
Yeah, I would like to first point out that the market does not seem to worry that much about what the U.S. president says, if it is the comment on the tariff rate. And if you look at, we actually have a similar phenomena on the Korean stock market. So if we analyze the stock market effect of the North Korea's threat on South Korea, it is also usually estimated to be almost zero. So it seems that these two phenomena seem to coincide with each other. People do not seem to care that much about such events that seriously anymore, because they are kind of the empty threat at some point, although it is it is believed to be some threat, but he changes his comment a lot. So maybe people do not really believe that it really hurt the Korean economy. Also, the global economy is expected to grow more than expected before, maybe in the last year, as was recently noted by the IMF. Because Korea really depends on the state of the global economy, especially the export of memory chips and related products, including cars. Such a rosy outlook on the global economy seems to make people expect higher future dividend, and it is reflected by the rising stock prices. However, although we can still hold a similar rosy view on the Korean stock market at this point, there are still many other factors, including trade uncertainty that we face these days a lot, heightened geographical risk around the world, and the possible threat from the inflation rate that can potentially drag down the global economy. So I think that while the trend of the KOSPI index that we have seen several months might continue for a while, but it might also fluctuate a lot.
Right, indeed. And before we delve deeper into the presence of those variables, Chen Hao, the Korea Development Institute, in its latest assessment of the South Korean economy, has said that the stock market rally has reflected positively on domestic consumption, hence keeping the Korean economy on its recovery path. Could you tell us a bit more about this?
Yes. So in December, the industrial production rose 1.5% from the previous month, while retail sales increased 0.9%, reversing the decline seen in November last year. Service sector output also grew 3.7% year-on-year, with gains recorded across most industries, suggesting that the recovery is broad-based and supported by rising incomes and the cumulative effects of interest rate cuts. Consumer spending in South Korea is gradually regaining momentum. Consumer confidence also remains strong. And meanwhile, the sharp increase in semiconductor prices, particularly memory chips, has helped drive a notable rise in South Korea's overall exports value. And also, separate figure from the Ministry of Data and Statistics from South Korea government shows that the consumer inflation in January eased to 2%, the lowest level in 5 months. And officials say that the slowdown was largely due to relatively stable exchange rates and a decline in global oil price, which fell from around $80 per barrel last January to about $60 this January. So for South Korea, these developments mark long-awaited positive news. And the key question now is whether the Seoul authority can persuade President Trump to reconsider his stance and lower the tariff to a more manageable level.
Right, indeed. And now, Professor Shim, then, what more can you tell us about the potential variables to South Korea's economic growth for this year, 2026?
My expectation is that the forecast of the BOK and the KDI, as you just mentioned, and or the IMF, which are all about 1.8% of GDP growth rate in 2026, would be realized if there's no significant negative shocks either to the Korean or the global economy. Let me further point out that the inflation expectation in Korea has been steadily about 2.6%, which is above 2%. So the inflation rate from, which is the actual inflation rate from CPI in the last month, together with greater GDP growth rate than expected before, this clearly indicates that the economy recently expanded due to the greater demand. And it might be a positive response of consumption to the transfer on the household in the previous year. And hopefully such an effect would have more positive shock on the economy also this year, because it usually takes several quarters for the investment to respond to greater demand. So, and the exchange rate, which has become too high from the last year, it might be a kind of the favorable situation for the exporting firms because it lowers the price of the goods that is exported from South Korea to other countries. And as I mentioned earlier, export is really important for the Korean economy, and it can also contribute a little bit rosy outlook than before because it increases the price competitiveness of the Korean firms. But as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we also should notice that there are so many factors that could negatively affect the Korean and the global economy, like the uncertainty surrounding the global economy is still there, and tariff pressure from the US would continue also in this year. So the economy might grow less than expected.
Right, quite a number of external risk factors then. Moving forward, Chen Hao, last week, South Korea joined a new trade bloc led by the US. It's called the Forum on Resource Geostrategic Engagement, also known as FORGE. Could you tell us a bit about this trade bloc, its purpose as well as implications?
So at present, many of the raw materials used in semiconductor production, including rare earths and various metals, are produced and refined in China. That's all we know. And for some metals, China controls as much as like 80 or 90% of the global supply. That means if Beijing authority imposes, for example, sanctions or retaliatory measures against a specific country, it could really be enough to disrupt that country's economy or trigger serious supply chain problems. So FORGE is a recently established multilateral cooperation framework led by the United States, mainly focused on supply chains for critical minerals. The core missions of Forge is to build a safer, a more reliable, and more diversified supply chains for critical minerals through cross-border cooperation. The group aims to reduce the risks associated with dependence on the single source, particularly China. Under Forge, the members work together to develop strategies to prevent key raw materials from being used as political leverage or tool of supply monopolization. And the goal is to reduce the risk of international markets being weaponized for geopolitical purposes. South Korea this time will serve as Forge chair country from February through June, and the mechanism currently includes 54 member countries, among them with Japan, with India, with Australia, Canada, and Ukraine. And Forge is also now trying to discuss the possibility of setting up the price floors for key minerals in an effort to prevent China from undercutting prices through dumping practices. Such measures are intended to protect Western companies' profitability and reduce the risk of long-term supply monopolization.
Right. Now, interestingly, Professor Shim, after joining the US-led trade bloc, South Korea also announced closer cooperation with China on critical mineral supply chains. Do you suppose this is a visible sign of pragmatic diplomacy? I mean, if that is the case, what makes this form of diplomacy so important in today's world of geopolitics?
Yeah, I think it is a clear sign of pragmatic diplomacy. The tension between the US and China still continues, and even worse, political tension between the US and other countries, including Denmark, Venezuela, Iran, and Canada also emerged. And such political tensions disrupt international trade more. So to have a close and concrete economic relationship with other countries than the US, including China, would help firms to make more investment and production plans under less uncertain future demand, because they really create a lot of demand for the goods that the Korean firms export. And history shows us that relying only on a particular country may increase the uncertainty level that surrounds the Korean economy when the relationship can be in trouble. And if we also think about the case of Canada, which was believed to be the one of the closest partners to the US, it also seems to increase the relationship with China, which is somewhat striking to most of us. So if that is really the case, Korea has also has a particular experience, kind of the similar problem with China and Japan several years ago, and it really hurt the exports and imports in Korea. So I believe that if we look at all the historical factors, the current action of the government is really necessary at this point.
Right, indeed. All right, Professor Shim Myung-gyu at Yonsei University, thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank you.
And Chen Hao here in the studio, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
Right, that is all for this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop, K-drama, K-movie, K-food,